Hello, podcast family, and welcome to Regulation Revolution, where we are igniting a revolution to help the world effectively manage and respond to their emotional experiences. It's not about what happens to us, but how we react that creates harmony or chaos in our lives. Emotional regulation is a complex process involving many factors. We offer this podcast to provide insight for you about how you can fine-tune and powerfully decide to transform your complex emotional states into empowered instances of self-mastery, peace, and increased awareness. Instead of having your emotions control you, you can learn to have control over your emotions. The following program in no way constitutes therapeutic counseling and does not establish a therapeutic relationship or offer any premise of confidentiality with any listener or participant. For more information, visit us at regulationrevolution.com. Welcome to today's episode of Regulation Revolution with your co-hosts Amy Reamer and Barry Vassar, Heart and Mind. Amy is a licensed therapist, professional speaker, and teacher. Barry is a pre-licensed therapist and practice manager at Heart and Mind. To find out more about Heart and Mind, please visit heartmindrva.com. To Regulation Revolution. Thank you for joining. This is Barry Vassar. I'm here with Amy Reamer. We're going to be chatting today about what is regulation. We hear it used in so many different terms and so many different phrases out there. We're talking about regulation in the mental health world. So Amy and I are just going to be chatting, and we're hoping that you can pick up a few things about this term regulation. And you're going to see just how meaningful it is to you, just how much of an impact regulation has on your life. But let's get right into it. Amy, here we are. Regulation, what is it? Do you want me to yammer my layman's term of it, or do you want to jump in with the pro term of it?
No. Give me when you think regulation. What are you thinking about?
Until I came into relationship with you and talking with you and business with you and everything else, I just always had in my head that regulation was being able to life was balanced. Like, I'm regulated if home life is good and work life is good and social life is good, then I'm regulated. And then it wasn't until I really started, learning from you and studying some of this and learning from other people. It has none to me, it has nothing to do with the circumstances. And I think I was looking at it as when your circumstances are good, you're regulated. And mind blowing.
Yeah, it's more kind of like external. What's going on externally sort of determines where I'm at, as opposed to what's going on the inside is actually more important. Or what really defines regulation in a lot of ways. And so it could be kind of crazy on the outside, or it could be really nice and calm on the outside. That doesn't necessarily mean we are on the inside, kind of. Yeah.
So it's like when I get into a situation and I've had to start thinking of it myself, I can get into a situation where there's nothing crazy going on. There's nobody yelling or fussing. It could be whatever it is. But yet my whole system feels off. Like I feel angst or I feel something's not right, even though everything around me is perfectly fine. So it really is. It has to do with more of what's going on, I guess, inside of you. Now I understand that a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, and I think it comes back to a really important, what I think is a central word to why the regulation revolution and how, like, we came about, like, this is the focus of our podcast, why we named it this, what is it we want to accomplish, right? And so I think it comes down to that word of safety and feeling safe. And even if the environment around you isn't necessarily a physical threat, as far as safety, which is what we usually think about first, most people, when they think safety, they think physical safety. So like us sitting in this room, there's no, tornado coming, or, the doors are locked, and, there's no physical safety threat. But that doesn't necessarily mean that internally, physiologically, like, we feel safe. Because who knows what we have in our past or our history that sort of informs what's going on right now.
Gotcha.
And so regulation, the way that I see it and the way that I've learned about it is really a lot about how well we do manage those things, or how well are we aware of that, and how do we recognize that, or how do we respond to that. And then it's also about regulation is also about how we interact with the world and others in it. So, um, if something, um, is happening outside and we hear that, how do we interpret that? And then do we feel safe because of our experiences make us feel like confident in handling that? Or maybe our experiences don't. And so it's really about how well we manage that. I would say one, like the visual, because I'm a real visual person. So if anybody that's ever known me, they know Amy's got kind of a picture in her head for everything. Um, so I have this visual of like a teeter totter. And for folks who aren't like old school, like Barry and I, like that's like a seesaw. Um, there's still, I think, a few out there on playgrounds, but some people may or may not know that as much. But well, I can show y'all. Like, here's my like little teeter totter that I have. So I think about regulation basically as how well does this piece right here work? So if you're on one side and life is sort of on the other side, whatever that is, whether that's relationship, work, political stuff, weather impending, financial stuff, whatever it is, even our own internal views of ourselves, right? Like the self-talk that we have, all of that's sort of on the other side, and you're over here trying to like manage life. And if life happens really big and hard and this doesn't work so well, you're going to get kind of slammed up or slammed down. And so if this thing here in the middle is working fairly well, if your regulation is good, you're still going to kind of go up and down, but you're not going to get kind of slammed. You're going to be able to manage it, adjust, do what you need to do to sort of bring it back relatively. I think as a society, a lot of times we think we got to get that perfection thing going. So that means, oh, I need to keep it balanced like this all the time. But the reality is, or if I work hard enough, I can keep these things from moving the teeter-totter too much. Right. So, but in reality, a lot of it is just physiologically how our nervous system's working, our brain and body connections working. And so that's, to me, regulation is it's a platform. Dr. Porges calls it a neural platform for how we deal with things and how we experience the world and others. So that's what I want to do is help people to understand this concept and what that looks like in their life. And then how, if they get more aware of it, understand it, recognize it in themselves, recognize it in others, it can really help us to regulate better. Get along with folks better, manage better, be in a connection with others as opposed to being in protection status.
So it's like the conversation we were having, and I still come back to it when I think about my daughter, who I have a weight difference on. Obviously, she is 6, and I was thinking about that teeter-totter thing. You and I had talked about it some, of how if I sit perfectly on my end and she sits perfectly on her end, she just flies up in the air. So every now and then I got to scoot the old butt forward, and I might be in the middle. And I think my thinking before was that, regulation looks like me standing perfectly in the middle of the teeter-totter, and it just everything is balanced. And I realize now that it's not so much that, and I have to think about this in my own life and lives of people that I work with, is that sometimes the weight on the other side is a little bit heavier, so you might have to slide back some. Sometimes it's a little bit lighter, so you might have to slide forward some. And I think before I was stuck more in the whole, it has to do with the circumstances more so than how, I guess, I'm balancing the circumstances, or not even balancing the circumstances, that's managing it. I'm talking balancing myself in the circumstances.
Yeah.
So,
It's maintaining that sense of safety as much as we possibly can, or getting back to it, right? Managing and getting back to it. And like your visual of adjusting for your daughter or someone else, is what I would call co-regulation, right? So it's like
Oh,
I'm
okay.
adjusting,
Yeah.
I'm adjusting
Regulation.
for someone else to help them manage, because especially for children whose nervous systems are still developing and growing and they don't have the capacities yet to regulate the same way that most adults can. Um,
Mhm.
that's the whole, and we'll talk about that too, of how do we co-regulate, either with
Mhm.
ourselves, with others, and how that can lead to self-regulation. But um, we adjust to meet where they're at or what do they need,
Okay.
and that helps their little, my science teachers will be happy to know that I know this is called a fulcrum. Um, so any of my past
I've learned something
teachers,
new
science
tonight.
teachers, they'll be very happy. Yes. So that means you're helping because you know that whatever's going on is too much for her to handle over here on her own. And so you adjusted to help her balance and manage
Gotcha.
it better. And by doing that, you're improving this. And think about it, it's like lifting weights, right? Like she's lifting weights by getting that help from you. And then
Mhm.
eventually she won't necessarily need dad to do that because her nervous system and her body and her brain and all of that complex stuff that's happening underneath the surface is working better on its
Mhm.
own, and it's developed and grown, to be able to do that. So
Oh,
I think, yeah, so regulation really is like, I think of it a lot like just sort of like another like muscle system, right? Like if you want to improve your muscles, you want to get stronger, you can lift weights, you want to make your lungs stronger, you start running or get on a treadmill. We have fairly easy access to those systems in our body. If we want to improve them, we can find someone who can teach us how to do that, help us do that, all of that. We haven't really had much ability to sort of like figure out our nervous system and how do we help to improve that system so that it
Mhm.
works better. Um, and we're getting better with that with this with the research and the information out about by the folks that are doing all that fantastic research and studying. Um, now us as like mental health people, we're learning how do we put that into play in therapy to help clients, help parents, help
Mhm.
relationships, all of that. So it's to me, it's a game changer sort of in the mental health world, but in general, it's a game changer to understand our bodies and how they work and how that interacts with other people. And then, when we would both go into defensive mode, right? Like
Mhm.
that, then, and we're both in this protective mode, we're not really accomplishing a lot.
Right.
Um, and so if we really want to accomplish things, if we want to teach things, if we want to support people, we have to remain regulated. Um, there was a therapist who's a teacher and an author. Her new book just came out, Robin Goebel, and she said this so succinctly about, it's our job to offer safety to others, but it's their nervous system's job to decide whether it will accept it or not.
Mhm.
And so all we can do is sort of manage our own regulation and understand what
Mhm.
that is. And so we'll go into that more in specific examples, like in parent-child relationships or marriage relationships, or how do we nurture babies so that they have a really good start to their regulation. Um, so yeah.
I was talking with somebody the other day, and I was explaining this to him. And I was joking about a little bit. Um, I was talking about the importance, when we talk about the polyvagal theory, and I was trying to explain the latter to him, and it was kind of difficult to do without a visual. Like I used everything, but I was talking about regulation in that circumstance or in that genre, if you will, of where sometimes we're at the top of the ladder, sometimes we're down here, sometimes we're right in the middle. And I got to tell you, by the time I finished explaining it to somebody, they were looking at me saying, "So wait a minute, when I'm feeling sympathetic, that's a bad thing. So I shouldn't feel sympathetic." And I was like, "No." They're like, "And what is this thing about a dorsal? I thought you were talking about a fin." And I'm like, "I'm not talking about a fish." And I've just realized we throw out, even when you're talking about regulation, we throw out so many clinical terms. Um,
Mhm.
and so I was throwing these things out, and I was like, "Okay, let me draw you a picture." So I started drawing on a napkin, sitting there, and like, "All right, here's a ladder, and here you are. But I know that's one of the things you and I talked about getting out there. What the polyvagal theory, and that ladder of where we're safe up top. And I was really trying to, get me on. I was really trying to get across to somebody that, for our listeners out there, hey, and viewers. So, in looking at this, if you picture the ladder, which if you're in the middle where you're activated, I was explaining to them, your fight and flight's going on and such like that. I was having somebody say, I don't understand why my partner is shut down and I'm trying to help them up the ladder like you say to do. I'm trying to reach down and pick them up and they won't come up the ladder. And I told them, I said, that's because you are the threat. I was like, y'all gotten in the argument and your partner is shut down. And now the very thing that caused me to shut down is saying, come on back up here with me. Why aren't you talking to me? So anyway, I just found that so interesting. I was also explaining to them, if you try to get up under somebody and push them up a ladder, you can't do it. It's hard.
Yeah.
But you can reach down and pull them up. But the only way you can do it is if you're a safe place. If you're not in a safe place, why is anybody going to come up to you? Why are they going to calm down if you're already running around like a crazy person? It's simple.
Yeah. No, like, what you're describing is fantastic. And so, like, when we think about polyvagal theory, which is by Dr. Stephen Porges, and then the latter, I believe, and if I'm saying this incorrectly, is Deb Dana, who's an LCSW licensed clinical social worker that works a lot with Dr. Porges and is teaching and training and all of that in this. And she's really good at kind of translating his science into like layman's terms. And so I believe she's the one that came up with using a ladder as a visual, but and some people do it in different ways as far as like what's the top, what's the bottom, all of that. Me personally, I like using it as when we're feeling safe, both physically, emotionally, our nervous system is in a regulated state. We're at the top of the ladder. We're feeling social. We want to be around people. We want to talk to people. We want to learn and grow. We want to try some new things. We've got some confidence, might have a little nerves, but we've got confidence. Like we're willing to try stuff and we're willing to connect. And that's your social engagement systems online. And what you're describing is with our nervous system, or the term that Dr. Porges uses, neuroception. So think about a radar. That's what I think about. Like an airplane radar going around. If it detects anything that seems dangerous or is a threat, we drop down that ladder into that fight flight space to check it out. What's going on? Is it safe? Not safe? But we are still motivated. That's like, so when people think that fight flight's bad, I will talk about, but we need our fight flight. That's where we get motivated oftentimes. That's where we take care of things. We check things off the list and things like that. So it's not always a bad thing, but we are still motivated to do something. I can either fight to make this better, or I can flee and get away from this. And so that's when we drop down the ladder. And then what happens if we're not able to successfully get rid of the thing that's making us scared or making us feel unsafe in that moment, or unable to get away from it? That's when we drop to the very bottom of the ladder. And that's more of a collapse state. And that's when we don't feel as motivated. We don't have much hope that we can get away from it or fight. We've really given up. And so obviously when you're at the very bottom of the ladder, it's hard to see your way back to the top. And you do have to go back through the middle, just like a regular ladder. You can't just leap to the top. Or most people can't, not me. You can't leap from the bottom all the way up to the top. You've got to touch those rungs in the middle to get back there. And like what you were saying was, when we're trying to help regulate with someone, co-regulation, which is all ages, it's just we're helping children to develop it. But as adults, we're also, my nervous system's talking to yours is talking to mine. And so what you were describing in that situation was that person has dropped all the way to the bottom of the ladder. The other partner sees that and is concerned about their partner, doesn't like them being at the bottom of the ladder. So their fight flight system has been activated because it's like, I need to help them. I need to fix this. I need to make it better. And so you go into sort of that fight space, but their system's like, yeah, I ain't ready to come back up the ladder yet. And I don't care if you push or pull up the ladder, I'm not coming. And so that sort of speaks to that, we can offer safety, we can be regulated ourselves and deal with our own fear in that moment and get back to a regulated space. And that's an invitation to their nervous system to come back up the ladder. So in those terms, like I always say, we don't push or pull, we walk beside. And the way that we walk beside is sending that invitation of safety. But if you're not in a place of safety yourself because you're freaking out because you think they're going to leave you, they're going to take you for all your worth, they're going to like abandon you, like whatever your fears are in that moment when they withdraw and pull away. I've seen this in situations with the parent, and especially, it's not all the time, but I've seen it mostly when I have a parent with usually a mom with a son, and a lot of times it's like a tween or a teen son who's, getting bigger, getting stronger, getting louder. And if that mom grew up in a dysregulated household, maybe fighting parents, domestic violence, maybe, or just a household that just didn't have a whole lot of regulation for them, this son who's now getting louder, bigger, maybe gets angry, maybe throws things or threatens the parent, that parent's nervous system is now shutting down. And they say, oh, but I was calm, I was quiet, I didn't yell, I gave him his space. But what happened is she probably just went all the way to the bottom of the ladder, and that kid can't even see you anymore. And they're just spinning around in that fight-flight space trying to find someone to help them. And the parent thinks that they're doing the right thing, but what has happened is their nervous system has sent a signal that's like, I'm gone, I'm done, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And left the kid sort of spinning on their own.
Well, back in the day, I used to call it I picked it up from somebody, some speaker somewhere. So let me give credit where credit's due. I don't remember who it was. But we would talk about husbands and wives and boyfriends, girlfriends, partnerships and such like that. We'd always say that there was a turtle and a stalker. And what that looked like was it was the one person in the relationship that when the conflict occurred, they would be like a turtle. They would slowly start trying to get away. So they were doing the flight. And then you would have the stalker. That's the one that's going to follow you from room to room because we're not done talking about this yet. And now, I'm looking back on it, and this was before polyvagal became, more into our culture and into psychology. But that's the way we call it. And really what it was is one was shutting down and the other one was amping up. So they were going, the more the one shut down, I would always find that the other person was feeling more and more abandoned or lost. It was usually abandonment that got triggered. I am talking to them. We get into an argument. They go in the other room and say they don't want to talk and close the door. Well, now I'm beating on the door saying, I want to finish talking about this from a person who obviously doesn't have anything to give. So they've shut down. And the other thing I think of is I can remember, again, going back in time where it was, I would have somebody say something to me like, we had a great week. He or she didn't complain about anything. We didn't have any fights. It was just an awesome week. And the other one you could just look at and they were like, because I shut down 10 days ago. I just haven't cared anymore. And so I wonder how many times we're sitting here and I think about it now. It's almost like I think of a college student in a classroom and I think of a teacher saying something like, and that class was so well behaved, they all sat there and paid attention. And I'm like, how many of them checked out? You were in dorsal your whole class, man. But okay. Regulation. I'm sorry, I took us down a different road.
No, it's still all in that like ballpark with regulation because you're exactly right. And I would say like if you're a therapist out there listening, like if they're trained in emotionally focused therapy, which is a couples model by Dr. Sue Johnson, and she calls them what you were just talking about with the turtle and the person pursuing. That she calls those withdrawers and pursuers. And so what you have is one person likes to withdraw when they're feeling that threat. The other person, they're feeling a threat by the withdrawal.
Right.
And then they tend to go more into the fight flight and keep pursuing and let's talk about this. And why don't you want to talk about this? The other person saying, I just need a break, give me some time, let me process. Like I just need some alone time. And so because they're feeling threatened, probably because the other person's nervous system is in this threat space. So it plays a lot. Like if you talk about attachment, right? Like there's that security that comes in there in attachment relationships. And I feel like I'm like plugging people, and I don't mean to be, but I also want to give them credit because this is what I do is I research the researchers. That's what I joke about how like I don't
brain geek.
Yeah, I'm a brain geek. And so the people who have put in that time and that energy to do the research, to write the books, to come up with the new models of therapy based on this knowledge and the neuroscience, like those are the people that I fan geek off on. Like I don't fan geek off of celebrities, like I fan geek off of researchers, which sounds really weird. But like Dr. Stan Tatkin, he did a couples model of therapy based on this biological system. And he talks about how, when we become in couples as partners, as adults in relationships, we're basically parenting each other now. And we are each other's co-regulator. Whereas in a parent-child relationship, it tends to be more, from the adult down to the child, helping them to co-regulate. And that's sort of the responsibility of whoever's caring for that child in the moment. Whereas when we're all adults, it is now us. There's sort of this misnomer that, I'm now this self-regulated adult, and I'm gonna be at the top of the ladder all the time. But the reality is that we are like kids, that we are still going up and down our ladder for lots of different reasons. Like I said, like it's external stuff with work or other stuff, or it's fears within that relationship that we have, or we're seeing the other person's regulation tank. And depending on people's experiences and histories, it's going to look different, which is, I had to explain to folks, like when we were talking about this podcast and the goal and the mission of it, this isn't for me to come in here and teach you 5 different exercises to improve regulation or to improve your vagal nerve or whatever, even though there are ways that you can do that. And we might talk about those in certain episodes, but that's not. Regulation is very individualized, and it's very much in the moment of what's going on. But if you learn to recognize it, become aware of your own, what you look like, the really important people in your life, what looks like for them, then you're going to be able to navigate your life better. So I can't, like I've always told people, like different things are going to work for different people. It's like if I teach you a coping skill, but that coping skill doesn't work for you, you start to learn you start to lose some faith in coping skills, right? Like, my therapist told me to try this, and then I did, and it didn't work.
Right.
And so it's not about that the coping skill isn't a bad thing. It's probably either it doesn't work well for you, or you tried it. You should have done it before you went down the ladder, but you waited until after you dropped down the ladder, and now it doesn't work. So I always talk about coping skills are more about where you're at on the ladder. There's going to be different ones that work. Or parents are trying ones that, work when their kid is here, but their kid is now over here. And so there's lots of different ways to sort of look at that. It's more meeting them where they're at in that state, but you have to recognize it too. And that's going to be very different for different people, different ages, all of that. We'll talk more of that in future episodes, but yeah, so it impacts us in lots of different ways. It's just interesting. Once you start understanding the concept of what regulation is, it gets pretty kind of cool to sort of start figuring out for your own self what that looks like.
Well, it's amazing. One of the things that I thought about, and you triggered this in my mind as we were sitting here, is that, like for me, like for some people out there, they're feeling dysregulated, their system's off, whatever it may be. They go to the gym, they work out. You would think, okay, well, you're working up a sweat, you're amping your body up, but yet when they walk away, they feel calm and they feel You know, people go outside and they go for walks and such like that. One of the things that I'm an impact person. So if you and I were having an argument, or I became dysregulated, I could literally, as I give myself disclosure, walk out of the room I'm in, walk outside, kick the rubber tire on the car, and I can come back in, just one kick, and I can come back in and sit down and be just as calm as can be. And it's so funny. I think that, you know, one of the things that we don't talk about a lot, and you and I talk a lot about regulation, is how what you need changes sometimes as you grow. Because I can remember going back probably 25, 30 years ago, or a long time ago, I was working in a daycare center. And I remember any time that I was bent out of shape, it seems like a common theme with Mary, you're kicking rubber tires. But it was funny, 30 years ago when I worked in a daycare center, and I was bent out of shape, they would send me to the infant room where I would hold the babies. And it's funny because you would think, oh, okay, you are a mad, angry guy. The last thing we need to do is send you a child. But no, if I picked up one of the little ones, I could sit there and it would just calm me right down, hold the baby. And even now, I think about my own children. If I'm bent out of shape or something, I can actually hold them or have them sitting next to me. And for whatever reason, it simmers me right down. And it's not like I'm in some mad fury out there. For our listeners, Barry Vassar is not a tornado of fury whirling about. But I'm just thinking about how it evolved, and how, like you said, there's different things that we do to regulate. Some people just, when we used to do, we had worked together before when I was doing crisis counseling, and there would be a crisis call at 1:00 in the morning. For whatever reason, it was the same routine. I would go to the bathroom, I'd stop on the way to the call, get a bottle of water, and I would drink the water going there. And by the time I got there, I was ready for whatever happened. So, yeah, I was thinking about that when you and I were talking about the tiger and the owl and the hippo, which for our listeners that are not familiar with it, Amy can explain tiger, owl, and hippo better than me. But tiger, part of the brain that says, I got to attack. I don't know. Explain it, Amy. I got to attack. That's not my tiger says. My tiger says, I will.
Your tiger is the one that wants you to go kick the tire. That's what tiger sort of drives stuff in there.
Tiger.
Yes. But yeah. So I'm also a play therapist, and so working with kids, and I would hear kids say things like, you know, they would have some kind of behavior that got them in trouble or whatever. And they would, you know, say, I really don't want to do that anymore. And when I tell my parents or whomever, like, I promise I'm not going to do that again. And then I do it again. Why is that happening? And then they really are beating themselves up because, like, they don't have much control. They really and truly are sorry. They don't want to do it again. They really want to do something different. And then wham, it happens again. And so with my brain geeky self, I'm sitting there going, well, I kind of know why this is happening. But if I start talking about amygdalas, hippocampus, and blah, 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 like you said, they're going to, like those college kids, they're going to be checked out and not hearing me. But I also was seeing how it was really, they were beating themselves up. It was really hurting how they viewed themselves. They really, there's something wrong with me. There's something broken. I'm a bad person. I'm a bad kid. And so I'm like, if they understood that their body is really doing what it was designed to do based on their history, and there are things that we can do to help it, like that's the empowerment piece. So that's a big part of what's behind this podcast, is really wanting to empower people that they can get back sort of into the driver's seat of their regulation and their emotions. So if I kind of connect the animals so the animals part really came originally out of like the neurosequential model, which was developed by Dr. Bruce Perry at the Child Trauma Academy in Houston. And he has that fabulous book, What Happened to You, with Oprah Winfrey. But he has studied child development and the impact of trauma and neglect, like on the developing brain, and then what that looks like, how that impacts us, right? And so So in very, very layman's terms, right? Like this is me explaining it to kids, and it works really good for all ages. But the cortex, that part of the brain up here, is the owl, and that's where we think and we make decisions. And if I relate it to the polyvagal theory, our owl is present when we're feeling really safe and understanding what's going on around us. When we sense danger and we sort of drop into that fight flight space, that's the tiger. The tiger's like, hey, what's going on? His job is to keep you safe, help you survive. And so he's going to decide, what is it do I need to do to get back to safety? So like in your case, he wants you to go kick a tire to get you feeling kind of back in control, or back, reminding you that you have power, maybe. I don't know what it is, but that's what the tiger is wanting you to do, and helps you to feel better. And then the hippo is and the tiger is basically your amygdala, or just taking your limbic system. And then the hippocampus, of course, is obviously a hippo.
Lizard brain. I had one individual refer to the amygdala as the lizard brain, the caveman brain, the reptile brain, with all of that cognition that goes with it.
And in reality, so if you really want to get into the science part of it, the primitive part of the brain is technically dorsal vagal, which is what we share that with reptiles, actually. As the tiger, we share with mammals, and all mammals have that. But it's not as primitive as
geek.
No. But like in simple, like this is to kind of keep it simple, right? And so basically what happens is we sense danger, tiger wakes up, owl flies away, hippo goes under the water. In the hippocampus has a lot of responsibility around memory and learning, and stores a lot of our memories. And also we can mark a memory as something extremely dangerous, so that that tiger, if it comes across that again. So if you walk down a street, you get assaulted by somebody, get robbed, get assaulted, extremely traumatic, and you happen to be standing next to a rose bush when all of this goes down. You may not consciously remember seeing a rose bush. You may not consciously remember that smelling a rose bush, but traumatic memory has now been, it's like a branding iron. It's now been stamped with what you were seeing, you were hearing, you were smelling. All of that's been sort of like iron branded into this memory of this traumatic memory. And so then let's say you show up at work, it's your birthday, and your significant other sends you a dozen roses. Well, you have a panic attack and you have no idea why you just had a panic attack. And the reason you had a panic attack is because you smelled roses, and that memory had been tagged with the smell of roses means danger, something really bad's about to happen, and your tiger wakes up. So you could have a panic attack. You could just get extremely irritable. You could feel the need to go out for a walk and not want to be around people. There's lots of different responses, but basically you dropped into that fight flight space because of that memory. And because a lot of times we don't understand how implicit memory works and how traumatic memories are stored, we don't always recognize the tie. It's different than, say, a combat veteran with PTSD. A helicopter goes over the building, they're at a meeting, they drop down and go under the table when they hear the helicopter. It's very specific to the trauma that they went through. It's a lot more, sometimes it's easier to identify, sometimes not, but there's a lot of things that are easier to identify. So I would say the point, if I tie regulation into this, because there's a whole lot more, we could have a whole episode just learning about the owl, a whole episode learning about the tiger, but the way that they work together, how they communicate with each other, it would be like, so I'll go back to that example with the roses. So the tiger smells the roses and says, you need to go into fight flight because something bad's about to happen and you need to prepare yourself. Okay. The owl is the one that says, well, no, not actually, because we're in our office and these were roses from a loved one and these aren't the same roses as what happened before, because the owl understands time, the tiger doesn't. And then the tiger's like, listens to the owl and says, oh, okay, cool. I'm going to go back to sleep. and he goes back to sleep, and you go about the rest of your day enjoying the roses and your birthday. That's regulation, is when
Now,
these different parts are doing what they're supposed to do, but they also talk to each other. But if the tiger sort of has taken over and in control, and the owl flew away, the hippo goes under the water,
right.
then that's when your day is going to go sideways.
And see, I'd always equated it because I'd thrown the hippo in there, even in that scenario, and I might be wrong on it, but I throw it in there with tiger wakes up, and I don't know why in my vision of it, the hippocampus is like this middle person, this mediator in my mind. Maybe it's just my brain. I don't know, brain geek. It might just be my brain, but kind of like this. Tiger says, I smell flowers. Hippo, what's going on? Hang tight. Let me check with the owl. Owl, what's happening? It's just, spouse brought some flowers and dropped off here at the office. Don't worry. Has nothing to do with the mugging. Then the hippo remembers, oh, yeah, that's right. Mugging was on the street. It wasn't in our office. Hey, Tiger, it's okay. It's just some flowers from the spouse over here. And I don't know why I make the connection that way, because I've recognized, or I've talked to enough people to where, and you may have experienced this, somebody listening may have experienced this, had the keys in their hand, had the argument with the significant other, and then the next thing they say is, where did I put my keys? And I always say it's because the tiger came out, and when you put your keys down, the hippo wasn't recording where you put the keys.
Yeah, he was under the water.
Yeah, so then when you calm down, the owl was saying, where we put the keys? Hippo says, I don't know. I wasn't paying attention. I was under the water. And so,
yes.
but it just
great. Yeah. Great example. Yes. No, great example. And honestly, obviously people with more neuroscience degrees, as I don't have any neuroscience degree, but people with actual neuroscience degree, I'm sure they can weave all of that together. But for me, with kids, often, if I'm in a therapy session, I'm not actually explaining the hippo at all.
Right.
But we will talk about it sometimes with memories or why they get triggered. But I just say, your tiger got woke up and the owl flew away. And so you couldn't really think clearly. You couldn't use your words, things like that. When I teach on it, I teach all three. Because like you said, I think it's really important for adults to get it. Teachers to know, right? This is why if you have a room full of kids that are dysregulated with all tigers awake and no hippos present, they're not gonna learn anything. You're not gonna get it through. It's not going to sink in, because when we're in survival mode, when we're in fight flight, we don't care about if 10 times 10 equals 100, because that's not going to help us to stay alive. And so the tiger is only concerned about survival, and that is it. It doesn't care about storing memories. It only cares about the memories that have those markers, because those are dangerous. So yeah, and like you said, and the owl flew away. I mean, and the owl holds their words, and I think that's another important example with your example. Have you ever been in an argument with somebody and you can't kind of think and you can't find the words that you want to use? It's or later. Oh, I love even the comebacks, right? If someone literally insult you, and you're you can't think of anything right then, and then an hour later you're like, dang, that would have been the perfect thing to say that.
It is an episode of Seinfeld where it was 3 days later, he was like, that's what I should have said.
Because
I wanted to.
They're all back, and they can they can think about it and come up with it. But at the moment, we were all tiger. Hippo was under the water. Owl flew away. We're gone.
I know we're closing in on our 45-minute mark, and I know we've hit with a lot. But I want to see. We set out for this episode at least to define regulation. Now, I'm going to throw out my layman's term of what I've kind of taken away from it. And then if you want to say it the way it's supposed to be. But I see regulation more of my tiger, my owl, and my hippo are in balance and doing what they are supposed to be doing when they're supposed to be doing it. Sometimes I need my tiger out because a mugger is coming at me with a knife and I'm not thinking about the best option. Sometimes I need to be educating somebody or in a conversation, and I need to have that owl doing its part. But I guess I'm thinking to myself now, looking at it as all three are doing their job the way they're supposed to be doing it, working together, and then I'm regulated. Would that define it for our listeners?
Yeah, I think they're communicating well. They're able to do each of their own jobs, but they also could communicate with the other one so that they are able to more effectively do their job. I mean, just think about any kind of a team effort or an assembly line, right? Like they all have to sort of do their own parts for it to go smoothly and kind of have a good outcome, right? So yeah, I would say in the whole tiger, owl, and hippo, juncture, it's about them communicating well and working well together. And there's lots of different things that can cause those things not to work. And I'll throw this one out there really, quickly, because I think it speaks to sort of where we're going to go from here. But when a baby is in utero and when they're born, they have a full grown tiger. So their survival system is ready to go. That's why they cry, because they got to get fed. And so I need to get someone's attention to come feed me or I'm going to die. So the tiger sort of is in charge of that. So they have a fully grown tiger, but they have a baby owl. And that owl doesn't get fully developed till around 25-ish.
52?
And yeah. Never, right? And so, but as adults, we are often dealing with people with an expectation that they have a fully grown and fully functioning owl and they're all communicating well, and we're expecting that. And then, if I take I'm going to tie these two together a little bit because we talked about polyvagal theory a little bit. And this is where I think it's interesting to think of how these work together, the ladder and them, right? When we're at the top of the ladder, they are usually all working well together and communicating. When we sense danger, and just think about, and when I use Dr. Porges's term of neuroception, this is under the surface. This is not perception. Perception is conscious. This is underneath, right? And we don't control it. And so if our neuroception feels something that feels not safe, that feels potentially dangerous, we slip into fight, flight. That's the sort of the tiger is now sort of checking things out. But, and I'll connect this also back to your example of kicking the tire. There are often things that we do in our fight flight system that make other people's tigers wake up that we've been taught as a society that's not polite, that's not correct, that's not good. So if dropping down the ladder, to me, some people will use another animal to describe that. Some people have used animals. Robin uses she uses an owl also, but then she uses a watchdog and a possum. Like those are the ones she uses to sort of describe those three. But what I think of dorsal vagal, which is that bottom of the ladder, that shut down collapse place, is a tiger that's either given up and he's like, oh, whatever. Whatever I do doesn't work anyway, and there's no getting out of the situation, so I've given up hope. Or he's been caged because he's either been, when I fought back, bad things happened to me. So fighting back isn't good. Fighting back leads to more danger and more pain and more hurt. And so a lot of times we might skip right on through fight, flight, and just drop on down, and our tiger gets caged. Or the tiger's just given up. And so that's the way I sort of view it. And we can still go there and be in moments in that as long as we can get back up the ladder at some point we're not meant to camp in those forever. They have a purpose and they help us. The shutdown and I'll speak to this, and I think this wraps it up really good, coming back around to that term of safety. You can be in fight flight, and as long as you feel safe, you're not necessarily going to let the tiger sort of take over, right?
Right.
When if you're doing a sport, you're going to be in fight flight because you're amping yourself up to be motivated and to hit hard or to concentrate. But you feel safe also. It's or like getting on a roller coaster. I think is a great example, right? You're scaring yourself on purpose. but you're strapped in, you tested the bar, you're relatively safe. There's all those regulations and everybody's checked it, but there's a little element of danger that's kind of exciting, but there's not so much danger that you really are truly like that frightened. And so you're in fight flight, but you still feel safe. But if you're in fight flight and you don't feel safe at all, that's going to look very different. So I would think even when you go and kick that tire, even though you might be a little dysregulated and have some anger or whatever is going on, or fear, or whatever's going on in your system, your owl is still present enough that says, yeah, you got to get something out here, buddy. But, and that's going to help you, but you're not losing control. You're not kicking kittens, like, so, so your owl is present enough to say, if you kick a tire, the worst that'll happen is you're going to break a toe, but you're not going to hurt anything. You're not going to cause, damage. You're not going to, owe a lot of money. Like, you've had to process something in there, to be able to control that. Go in and punch in a punching bag, right? Those things. And I've got 50,000 other thoughts, of the examples you brought up. Going to the gym, it can make you feel better, but if you're still stressed and you're financially underwater and your spouse just left you and you're, whatever, you might have, rock hard abs, but you might end up dying of a heart attack because stress and not being regulated and not being able to manage your regulation. I won't say being regulated all the time, because that just sounds like you're supposed to just be calm and handle everything, but not having the ability to get back to that ladder to feeling safe and knowing what that feels like, has a lot of medical health complications as well. There's so much tied to that, which again, another whole episode, right? But safety is such a key piece of this.
We were talking about, another whole episode. I think our next upcoming episode, episode 2, we're going to be looking at the importance of in utero to 12 months, I think, that first year, and a little before that first year, as far as how, I guess, the tiger develops and how we develop in the womb and how that plays. Because sometimes what's going on there during those 9 months, during that time of pregnancy with the child's experience, and comes out when they come out and comes with them. But that's going to be our next episode, right? In utero to 12 months.
Dr. Perry talks about his research. And again, you can kind of go Google that or find it out from Dr. Perry, but he talks about the research shows that if a baby gets good enough care while in utero, and that experience is good enough without the parent living in constant stress or violence, that kind of thing, and they get good enough caregiving. Think about the foundation of the house. You have built a really strong foundation now for that tiger, owl, and hippo to grow and work well together, because they have this really good system sort of in place for that to happen. And even if they got taken out of that at a year old, 2 years old, maybe something happens in the environment, they change caregivers, something tragic happens in a family, and it all changes, they still have this really good foundation, and they still have a higher chance of success in life, being functional, have relationships, being able to work, those kinds of things. Whereas 0 to 12, if they have not good care at all, neglect, trauma, stress, constant over that period. And when I say good enough, I don't want to scare parents, because you don't have to be perfect. We're just good enough. It's good enough. But if it's a terrible experience for the first 12 months or so, and then they go to a good home, let's say it's a adoption situation or a foster care situation, they get removed from the physically unsafe sort of environment to a safe one, they actually still have a less shot of being successful, because that foundation didn't get laid when it really needed to be. It's not all doom and gloom. Like you can still help that, but it's harder to recognize and to understand what those behaviors mean. That's a lot of what Bruce Perry's work is with the neurosequential model, and understanding the importance of that. And so, our next episode, we're going to talk a little bit about just sort of like, let's look at that, setting the foundation, because if we can set it early and set it up well, then you're setting them up hopefully to have, more muscles to get up and down that ladder, like through their life, rather than them not kind of having that good foundation and good start to regulation.
Outside of defining regulation, I've got a couple of takeaways out there. One, we've now learned Amy is a brain geek, and if you're going to the movies with her, she's already seen it. She starts giving you spoilers for the next episode. And then on the flip side, with me, Barry, if I get upset, you either need to hand me a rubber tire or hand me a baby, and you better be careful which one you hand me. So really read where my tiger's at. Okay, it's been Regulation Revolution. For more Regulation Revolution, you can visit our website, regulationrevolution.com. You can replay this podcast. Most importantly, join us for our next episode, where we're really going to dig into this. We hope it's been helpful, and we will talk to you during our next episode. Thank you again, Amy.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
The preceding program in no way constitutes therapeutic counseling and does not establish a therapeutic relationship or offer any premise of confidentiality with any listener or participant. If you or someone you know is in need of counseling services and reside in the Commonwealth of Virginia, please visit us at heartmindrva.com for more information.